Free and Healthy Children International is dedicated to research, education, and access to Homeo Prophylaxis. Homeo Prophylaxis, or HP, is a method for educating the immune system towards infectious disease while preserving children's health. HP is an alternative to vaccination for infectious disease prevention without the attendant risks that come with vaccines. HP enhances normal childhood development through gentle immunological stimulation. It involves a systematic use of homeopathic remedies approved by the Homeopathic Pharmacopoeia of the United States to gently stimulate immunity. If you are looking for an alternative to vaccines, consider Homeo Prophylaxis as a solution to your dilemma. Free and Healthy Children International has a directory of practitioners around the country offering HP. Visit our website to learn more and find a practitioner, freeandhealthychildren.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization working around the world to keep children's immune systems healthy.
So I am going to talk about healthy supportive fevers and the role of acute illness. I'm going to talk about Homeo Prophylaxis in a nuts and bolts way because we keep talking about it today, but like what is it really? And I'm going to talk about some of the clinical findings of it. Next slide. So when my children were little, I was not a homeopath, and I would be nervous when illness was going around daycare or school. I didn't want them to get it. And I didn't understand until I went to school and had a practice, really, that acute illness is developmentally, teaches the immune system how to recognize what is other and what is self. It's really something developmentally that is important for children to go through. And so by the time the H1N1 virus came through, my son was in middle school, I was like badly hoping he'd get it, and he never did. Because I knew he would then have immunity for life to that. So the metaphor that I like to use in terms of acute illness is that if you stand up to a bully, if the child stands up as opposed to the parent intervening, they will have that kind of internal strength for life. And I sometimes see, and some of my clients will report to me, that after an acute illness, they see a developmental leap. Like they'll see a child start talking who wasn't talking, or start walking. Next slide. So in the case of many acutes, one of the elements of an acute is a fever, and people have fevers or they hear the word infection and they get really scared that they need to lower the fever and that they need medical intervention. So I want to talk a little bit about fevers to take away some of the fear and to give you a sense of some of the purpose of fevers. So fever is how a body essentially kills off the bacteria or the viruses that are making it ill. It is really the body acting like an oven to turn up the temperature to kill off the bacteria or virus. It is the same reason why we cook a Thanksgiving turkey to at least 165 degrees. So it is really optimal, and fevers in the 101 to 103 range is that optimal range for killing off the infection. The other benefit of fever is the heat will promote sweating, and that's a detox pathway, which is also going to help move the illness through. So those are reasons that, fevers are beneficial. The risk of fever, dehydration, which can be dealt with fairly directly by really making sure you or your child is getting fluid, and you have to sometimes be very creative. I am a fan of water, not juice, and if you need to pretend that it's juice by putting a few drops of it into water to make it seem more interesting, but you need to, push liquids, that's important. And then the other risk is febrile seizures, and what that essentially means is a seizure that happens because of a high fever. That's what that phrase means. And usually we're talking fevers, the risk for that is more in the 105 or 106 range. So in terms of when to treat a fever, so I feel like if it's a low grade to a moderate fever and your child is basically doing well, like they're pretty much themselves, there's really no reason to intervene at all. It is a good immune response. And as I work with families, and I have kids where sometimes the parents, when they bring the child in, they say they've never had an acute illness, or very few, but they have other more serious problems, and then they start to have acutes with good fevers. I actually consider that progress, especially if the deeper problems are getting better. So I don't feel like anybody needs to rush to treat a fever, even homeopathically. But if it feels like it's affecting the child in a bigger way, or if it's a higher fever, then there is a reason to treat it. Next slide. Couple approaches, and you could use any or all of these. They don't go against each other. So homeopathic treatment, which is essentially picking a remedy that matches the very specific symptoms that your child has. So there isn't a remedy for fevers. There's a remedy for the child's fever. So when parents are concerned about a fever, I have them call me. We do an acute consult on the phone. I don't have them bring their child into my office. I have them describe what they're seeing, how the child's behaving, what is unusual about the child, and then we select a remedy. A lot of my parents will have home remedy kits so that then they have easy access to remedies. Another approach is herbs, and those are easy enough to keep at home, either in a dry form, so you can make a tea, or in the tincture form, where it's like in a little bottle and it's like in an alcohol base. And you can then, if it's a dry form, it's tea, and then they're getting hydration. If it's the tincture, you can dilute it in water. You don't want to, it doesn't need to be a lot. And again, you're not trying to get it to 98.6. We're just trying to lower it, maybe more to 103 or 102. So those are some of the herbs that can be helpful. There's a lot of herbs that can be helpful. You can see that quite a few of these do promote sweating. So you can see that how they're releasing the fever is by promoting sweating. And then cool application. So again, we don't want to use cold because we don't want to shock the body. So this could literally be a cool washcloth on the forehead, on the belly, on the arm. Or cool bathing, which sounds a little too much to me, or sponging. So all of these things, less is more, and the goal again is not to get it to 98.6. It's just to get it a little bit lower so that you are getting out of that febrile seizure range, essentially. Next slide. So now we're going to move into the Homeo Prophylaxis part of the presentation. So really the underlying question of kind of why one would want to look at Homeo Prophylaxis is how can we stimulate immunity without harming the person, and how can we mimic the natural response to disease? So the natural response would be you would get exposed to the disease and you would get it. How can we mimic that natural response with an artificial means that's also safe? Next slide. So this brings us to this mouthful of a word, Homeo Prophylaxis. So it's essentially a systematic approach of using nosodes, and I'll define those in a minute, prior to exposure to the disease for the purpose of stimulating the disease process. Now, all of the remedies in the Homeo Prophylaxis program are made in the same way that homeopathic remedies are made, which is they're made in a homeopathic pharmacy. They're not made in someone's downstairs lab. People think I make remedies at home. I do not. They're all FDA regulated. They are safe. They're effective. They're natural, and they're this highly dilute process. So that's true about any homeopathic remedy that you would get from any homeopath or a homeopathic pharmacy. Next slide. So the remedies in the Homeo Prophylaxis program are called nosodes, and a nosode is made from a disease agent of the disease we're trying to address. So usually it's like a discharge. And these remedies have been around for a long time. And the way that they're prepared is they are highly dilute to the point where it becomes more of an energetic dose rather than a material dose. So the idea is that this energetic frequency comes into the body has the opportunity to respond as if it has the disease without getting the disease, and then the frequency passes out, and then the result is learning about the disease without the suffering of the disease. Next slide. So there is a long history of Homeo Prophylaxis. There's like too many words on this page, so I'll kind of simplify. So the founder of homeopathy in the late 1700s, Samuel Hahnemann, there were many epidemics in the 1700s, 1800s, without many ways to address them, and homeopathy was very effective in addressing a lot of epidemics. And the first epidemic where homeopathy was used was the scarlet fever epidemic in 1799, and he found a matching remedy. And so when there is something like an epidemic, and we don't really see those right now very much, homeopaths will collect what they're seeing as a symptom picture, and it will tend to gel into 1, 2, or 3 remedies, and then we fairly easily can pick from those. And so even now when flus go around, as homeopaths, we will share what we're seeing working, and that becomes information that we all share because we'll start to see trends. So he found a matching homeopathic remedy that was able to contain the spread of the scarlet fever. And then other homeopaths of the day similarly, used homeopathy. So there were cholera epidemics and typhoid epidemics, a variety of epidemics that were addressed successfully with homeopathy. And even today, in some countries, and in a few minutes I'll share some slides about that, homeopathy is still being used in this kind of more of a public health way, really. Next slide. So here's some of the examples, some of the clinical evidence that's more modern evidence. So the first one is specifically about the Homeo Prophylaxis protocol, basically the same protocol that I use when I'm working with families and the other practitioners who are HP supervisors use. So Isaac Golden is an Australian-based PhD and homeopath, and he's been using this Homeo Prophylaxis protocol for quite a while with his clients. So he did a longitudinal study of 3,000 children over 15 years to track if they went through the whole HP program and then they were exposed to specific diseases, how did they fare? And 90% of them did not end up with the disease. And I have another slide with more details on that. So that's like real specific to the protocol that we're using now. Then the meningitis example is more of a public health approach. So in Brazil, basically 65,826 people treated with the nosode that corresponds to meningitis, and 23,000 not treated, and those treated who were exposed, and that 95% effective. And then Cuba has done the most wide-scale use of Homeo Prophylaxis as a country. So leptospirosis is kind of endemic to tropical areas. It's a disease that's carried by rats. So there were 2 years in 2007 and 2008 that millions of people, a total of 2.3 million people, were given the nosode for leptospirosis, and an 84% effectiveness as compared to when people were not given it, 21% ended up with the disease. Next slide. Cuba also did, this looks like it was done in Barcelona, studies where this is now a lab study with actual lab animals, so this is not on people because you would never do this. So group A was injected with leptospirosis, they all died. Group B was given the vaccine, the conventional vaccine, and then injected with leptospirosis, they all survived. Group C was given the homeopathic nosode and then injected, and 80% survived. So it's not 100%, but that's an amazing effectiveness for a very safe method. And I'm not going to get a lot into immunity. Kate's going to, I think, talk about it a little more in her talk, but basically Homeo Prophylaxis is working on cell-mediated immunity as opposed to antibody production, which is how conventional vaccines work. Next slide. So this is a lot of numbers, and this is based on Isaac Golden's research. And essentially, I'll call your attention to the last line, line number 6, because that is, of all the people in his study, they were children, who had been gone through the Homeo Prophylaxis program and then were exposed to diseases, the effectiveness, basically you can see averages out to be about 90%. So that's very, it's amazing effectiveness. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Homeo Prophylaxis, a little more in the nuts and bolts way. So this would be, if you participate in this program as a parent, you get a booklet like this for each of your kids, and it's where we keep track of when the remedies are given, the date of the remedies, any reactions to the remedies. This is a little snapshot of one page from the booklet. So it's a program that is administered over about 44 months, although it's possible to shorten the amount of time that you go through it if you want to. If your kids are older than about 2 years old, it can be shortened. And each one of these remedies corresponds to an illness. So I'll quickly go through. Whooping cough, pneumococcal disease, polio, and we're actually working with the polio nosode, so this is an old slide. HIV, meningitis, tetanus, mumps, measles. You can add other remedies if you want. I've had people add German measles. I've had people add chickenpox. It's a conversation we have. And we work with 200 seed potencies and 10 Ms. And this is a schedule and can be easily shifted when a family comes to me and they go, it's summer, we're barefoot, we want to move tetanus up to the top. We move the tetanus up. We're worried about a measles outbreak, we move up the measles no-so. So it can be very tailored to the family's needs. Next slide. So what homeoprophylaxis and vaccination have in common is they both are aiming to prevent disease. They're both derived from the actual disease, and they're trying to stimulate immunity prior to exposure. Next slide. But they have more things, there's more ways they're different than in common. With homeoprophylaxis, we are giving a single disease at a time. We are looking to stimulate a general immune system response. They're given by mouth. They are pure form of the disease agent with no additives. And they're made in this way, we use this word attenuation, which is this way that all homeopathic remedies are prepared to make them very dilute. Vaccination is, we're giving multiple diseases at a time in general. It's hard to get single vaccines for many things. We're looking at specific antibody production. It's injected into the muscle. It's not going through a normal pathway that most bacteria or viruses would enter a body. It's a crude dose of the toxin or the bacteria and their additives. Next slide. A little more comparison on the methods. What we're looking for, what we see with homeoprophylaxis is a mild immunological response. And this could be that there is a fever, there is discharge, like discharge could be nasal discharge could be vomiting, discharge could be diarrhea. Sometimes there's like almost no response, but if there is, it would be that kind of response. And the concern I think probably everyone here has with vaccination is there can be a lot of side effects and the body can overreact because it is processing a lot at one time. Next slide. Some important points to consider if this is something you're considering for your family. So homeoprophylaxis is designed for parents who decided not to vaccinate but want a safe alternative. What I want to add to that is you might be in the position where your kids are partially vaccinated and it's fine. We can do this program in that situation. You might be in a situation like I was in where my kids, because I changed as my kids grew up, my daughter, who is the oldest, was vaccinated more than my son. So it's not an all or nothing, and I think there's space to work with what your family situation is. No method is 100% effective. The program, as I said, is flexible. We can start at 1 month old or older, but I have many families where, one kid's 6 months old, one is 3 years old, one is 5 years old, and we start them all at the same time when the parents start the program. And know that you could be doing this program and then you might later decide that you would want your child to have immunization, and they can. It's not gonna create any problem. Next slide. So basically what happens, this is my last slide, is when somebody decides that they want to sign up for the program, I schedule a 1-hour appointment and we meet in my office and we go over the nuts and bolts of the program, like how do you actually administer it. We go over any questions the parents have. They get booklets for each of the children, and the remedy kit, which is a small little box that looks about like this, is ordered and comes directly to you from the pharmacy. And supervisors, so the families I work with, I'm available to them for any kind of support and questions. So they might email me, they might call me. We don't usually meet again, but if they want to, we can. But mostly people are like, if they live far away, it's like we're going to meet one time and the rest we're going to do it on the phone. I have a couple of families I'm working with in another country, and then we totally do it by Skype. And you can start at any age, even if some vaccines are given. And the basic cost is $200 for the first child, $300 for if you have a family of 2, 3, or 4. Then there's a kit, program booklets per child, and postage, some shipping. So it's the basic cost of the program. Next slide. So this is just, I didn't put a ton of resources in here, but this is the Isaac Golding research, and some of that research, there was a slide on some of that research. So I'm going to stop now because my time is up and ask if anybody has any questions. All right, I'll start with you.
So what if you have a partially vaccinated child
Mm-hmm.
who is vaccine injured? Do you check the titers to see what you would need to address, or do you just do the homeoprophylaxis for the ones they haven't done? My concern for my child specifically is chickenpox. We never did chickenpox vaccine.
Mhm.
We did vaccinate up to 15 months,
Mhm.
injured, so we are not vaccinated
Right.
anymore. The chickenpox concerns me, he's 11.
Mhm.
I've gone to chickenpox parties, he
Mhm.
can't catch it, so, how do you do that?
So, and Kate may speak to this because you deal with more vaccine-injured children than I do, but I have had titers drawn for my children, and then those ones I've just not done anything for. And we can pick and choose ones that you would want to do. Do you want to add anything?
Just that you have to have a healthy immune system to engage with the homeoprophylaxis. So if the immune system is compromised from previous vaccines, the first task is to work with the homeopath to get the immune system healthy again. And then do you want to repeat the recording? And then once we see evidence that the immune system is getting a fever, making a discharge, all that, then you can do the HP. And just add on that it's actually about educating as opposed to trying to prevent disease.
So I'm going to repeat some of what Kate just said. So one of the things I do when people call me up to schedule or to inquire is I do a few questions on the phone about the health of the child. So there are times where there's enough immune compromised type issues or vaccine injury that we want to do what we call a constitutional treatment first before we start homeoprophylaxis.
And one other thing, we did cease as well, so does that like wipe any of that out?
Yeah, but it might still make sense to do some constitutional treatment. Yeah. Let's see, I know there were other questions over there.
Can adults ever do the program?
Can adults do the program? Interesting that you asked. So I have a family that I'm working with where the grandparents wanted to get vaccinated for whooping cough because there's like billboards up, right, about this. And so the mother said, my parents want to get vaccinated for whooping cough. And I said, I think you should just all take the pertussis nosode at the same time, the whole family, the 2 kids, the 2 parents, and the 2 grandparents. So we sent extra doses. So yes. And it actually is kind of a herd, it's like a herd thing, right? It's good. A herd in a good way. So yes, they can.
I was hoping you didn't say herd immunity.
No. But in a way, yes. But in a different way. Yeah. Over there.
Is getting the prophylaxis remedy the same as getting the disease in terms of lifelong immunity and natural immunity? Is immunity the same as getting the disease?
No. So if you get the disease, if you get chickenpox, you will have immunity for life. If you get the H1N1 virus, but that's not usually part of the protocol, you will have immunity for life. It's not an apples to apples comparison. The most effective immunity for life is going to be getting the disease, but then you have to go through the suffering of the disease. So it's not, do you know what I'm saying? It's not exactly an apples to apples comparison.
Because herd immunity has been ruined by vaccinations, we're going to get the disease a lot worse.
Yes, which is why you would want to consider this. For a lot of people, getting the disease is worse. And know that if you're in the Homeo Prophylaxis program and your child does get an infectious disease, your homeopathic supervisor will work with you and find remedies for it. So, other questions?
My previous doctor told me to get, because I'm pregnant, the whooping cough vaccine to
Mhm.
build up immunity for the unborn child. I obviously am not going to do that,
Mhm.
but there's that 1 month in between birth and HP.
Mhm.
Is there any way to build immunity for that time frame? Do you understand?
The best immunity is going to be nursing, and ideally a vaginal birth. So the nursing is going to be a child at that age. I mean, she's bringing up, Sally, this thing that's kind of crazy, which is immunizing pregnant mothers. These vaccines have never been tested on pregnant mothers with the idea that it's going to benefit the fetus or the baby. And the baby's immune system doesn't develop that way. So I think it's really good that you have the foresight to say no. Yeah. Other questions? Over there, yeah. You, yeah.
Is there, we're doing the HP program for my daughter, and one of the questions that I had is if she doesn't encounter some of these childhood illnesses like measles or chickenpox, which are not around very much, does she run risks later in life not having had the disease or the vaccination? Is the HP really sufficient into the rest of her life, or is there ever a point where you recommend doing a traditional vaccination?
That's a good.
Susceptibility. We can change susceptibility within it.
Right. So let me say this question back so it gets recorded properly, which is if a child goes through HP and then later in life they're exposed to one of these illnesses. So the HP program is working on, like, one of the phrases we use is we're like closing the door on the susceptibility for each of the illnesses in the program. Now, it doesn't mean the door is locked shut with a key. But it's not the same as a vaccination where it's only good for so many years and it wears off and then there's a booster. It's more of a permanent change and a building of an immune system that's a permanent thing. But they could get exposed at any age and they could get the illness. So, any other questions? And I'll be around for questions after and then I'm on the panel, so you will all have opportunities for more questions. Thank you.